Welcome to Sam Outside. I'm Sam and I'm outside spending some quality time with the trees in my forest. In particular, at this time of year, I find myself really drawn to this particular species. That's right, it's the yellow birch. The birch in particular, and I'm surrounded by a couple. We've got white birch, silver birch, and yellow birch. But it's the yellow birch I appreciate the most in the patch of forest that I have an opportunity that I'm grateful to say that I can walk in and share several times a day. The yellow birch is quite striking in that a little bit different than the white birch. It doesn't stand out as quickly in terms of its color, but once you do recognize it, because it does have sort of a yellow sheen to it, I start to notice that their location and their population tends to be found a little more on the northern sides and on the eastern slopes. They're not found at the high ground where it's too dry, and they don't particularly like having wet feet, unlike some of the other tree species. So, and it's something about the heat. They don't mind being shaded. They don't mind being cool. So in our area and throughout most of Ontario, a lot of our topography tends to line itself north-south. That's due to the last glacial period 10,000 years ago, where all the ice moved forward and north and south in direction, and all the watersheds carved the rivers in a north-south direction. Yeah, there's always exceptions, but typically that's what we see in terms of features. So as I'm navigating the landscape, I'm relying on the sun, and I'm relying on elevation and the direction of water flow, and I've got a pretty good idea of where the cardinal directions are. So if I'm on sort of the eastern slope or even facing north, I'm going to come across more of these. These are my yellow birch. Yellow birch, for me, someone who does have a pastime working with wood, as a woodworker, yellow birch is one of my favorites, not only because of its color, but because of its density. It can be so good to work with that you can get a high polish off of it. All right, you can get to sanding it down, and it'll have a nice gloss. And because of its color and its lines, it'll have a definite difference in the end product relative, let's say, an ash or a maple, or even a tight-grained oak. So it does have a little bit of a difference when it comes to working with it. If you're someone like me who also happens to dabble in spoons and other cutlery, when it's green, it's just amazing to work with. The smell alone. And it's that chemistry that relates to that smell that draws my attention in the past couple of years to the yellow birch, because of its chemistry. All the birches have some form of antiseptic, antibacterial, antifungal, more so than the other deciduous trees. But it's the yellow birch in particular that's been used by indigenous peoples all over North America for its healing benefits relative to the other birches. Oil of Wintergreen comes from the yellow birch. The yellow birch itself, used for healing impurities in the blood and anything to do with our urinary tract. So as a tea, it's quite sweet. In fact, the yellow birch as a sap was consumed raw, but much like maple sap, it was discovered that if you boiled it down, you could actually make a quite thick, golden, delicious syrup. The difference between maple syrup and birch syrup from the yellow birch is its concentration. I happen to have some experience with making maple syrup, and on average, the ratio is 40 to 1. 40 liters of maple sap to make 1 liter of maple syrup. The ratio with yellow birch is 60 to 1. So when we're talking about resources and availability, it's just not as popular because of the energy and the resources it takes to make it. But if you ever have a chance, it's slightly different in its flavor because it has more of that wintergreen, right, or that spearmint flavor to it. So as a medicinal plant or an edible consumable plant, The leaf itself is consumed. You can consume it raw, but most people would put it in a tea. But it's not just the leaf, the way we would think of most harvesting most other plants for tea. It's the bark, all right? So from the twigs to the buds, just taking 6 to 8 inches from the end of a branch, leaf, bud, stem, bark, all of it, as long as it's the oils. So the yellow birch itself, not only having the sweet flavor, and whether it's hot or cold, will have a refreshing scent, will have a refreshing flavor, but there is some sweetness to it, unlike literally every other tree in the forest. Even maple itself, if you're to scratch the bark on a maple like this and take a look at the leaf, you won't get what we would know and associate the smell of maple. But the moment you find a yellow birch and you scratch it, there's that instant smell, the release of the oils, which is associated with that oil of wintergreen. So as a leaf, it can be used as a warm compress. And if you take the poultice from the inner pith or the inner bark, that could be put on. They would use it for joint stiffness, even muscle pain. And in terms of swelling, it was the warm compress was used there. So anti-inflammatory, right? Whether it's external or internal, antibacterial. Now there are some risks, right? As it's used for urinary ailments. There's a risk if you've got high blood pressure as a diuretic. The tea, if ingested, it does change the body's ability to retain salt. So there's a bit of pressure there of raising blood pressure. But that's, that would be in large amounts, and if you had a severe case of high blood pressure. But overall, in terms of flavor, and in terms of availability, and in terms of what it does, using different parts, whether it's the leaf for a tea or the twigs or the buds, there were actually times where there could be found recipes for fermenting the sap and making or adding it as a beer. All right, so there's yellow birch beer, if that's the availability and the resources that you're going to put into it. So the inner bark itself, or the pith, birch cambium is slightly thicker than most other cambiums. That was dried and ground down for a flour, right? And it would still have those antibacterial, antifungal properties, and would still have that pleasant aroma and flavor. So that was another use for it. The tree itself lives a little bit longer than the standard paper birch or white birch. And we do have some magnificent specimens. Unfortunately, when they get too large, they lose that golden sheen, right? So you get something that's a little rougher textured. But they do have quite a long lifespan, unlike some of the white birch. So of all the trees in the forest, most of us, by us being Canadians, can pretty readily identify the maple tree, and of course the iconic conifers in terms of the pines and the spruce, the balsam and the hemlock. But life gets a little more challenging when we start to think about our deciduous trees. So once the leaf is gone, identifying a tree by its bark, depending on how big it is, just got to spend some time with them. All right. So even the juvenile, the sapling of the yellow birch, before it gets that yellow sheen to it, as a sapling, it still looks quite green, and you wouldn't really be able to tell it from many other species unless you scratch the bark and had a chance to smell it. So between the ash and the beech, and the black cherry, the maple, the oak, the other members of the deciduous tree forest, the birch, very quick and easy to identify. Just walking through the forest and noticing that sharp contrast, all right, of white. So here's a great example of our white paper birch, right? You won't get these long fronds when you see the yellow birch, right? So you're going to get something a little less subtle, right? You definitely see that this yellow birch has a yellow or golden tinge to it, and the loose bark tends to just be a small ribbon, if that. So of all the birches, I look forward to finding specimens of yellow birch and having opportunities to share yellow birch with my family, my friends, with my colleagues, with my guests, for its aroma, for its flavor, and for all of its abilities. So the next time you're out, start really noticing the other living things around you. 95% of them are going to be trees. The yellow birch is among my favorite. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. I'll talk to you again soon. Go find a yellow birch. They're out there. Thanks. Bye-bye.